Welcome to episode 24 of True Talks Live. This is a live stream talk show. It was created to provide you with new perspectives for project management in a format that we hope you will find informative and entertaining. Tonight's show is being recorded for on-demand viewing. My name is Beth May, and I am your MC for tonight. True Talks Live is co-sponsored by PMI WDC and PMI Southern Maryland. Our creator and executive producer is the innovative and resourceful Harry Zolkauer, who is also the current president of PMI Southern Maryland. Our director of communications is the talented Marta Leva, and our producer is the one and only Dan Stay. As you probably know, there has been a surge of interest in artificial intelligence over the past 5 years or so, mainly spurred by the public release of ChatGPT and other generative AI tools. These tools use predictive, large language models to, in ChatGPT's words, generate coherent and contextually relevant text across a wide range of topics closely resembling human written content. This type of AI is only one type among many, but its popularity is driving increased public interest, investment, and discourse about all types of AI. The title of tonight's episode is Artificial Intelligence and Project Management, but this will not be yet another discussion of how to use AI tools to facilitate project management. This will be a discussion of the unique challenges and the solutions associated with managing AI projects. With the increased activity in developing and using AI tools, chances are pretty good that you will find yourself managing an AI project. This has its own unique challenges. For example, it takes a different mindset and skill set to develop a system that needs to be trained, a system which produces outputs that are random and probabilistic. Our guests tonight are Ronal Schmelzer and Kathleen Walch, and they know how to do that. Ronal Schmelzer is a sought-after expert on AI and data best practices and AI project management. He also chairs a number of industry groups focused on AI adoption and best practices. Kathleen Walch is a keynote speaker, researcher, and thought leader on emerging technology best practices. At the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, ATARC, she chairs an AI working group that she and Ronald helped launch to help organizations, including government agencies, apply AI best practices. In addition, she is a contributor to the expert group on AI risk and accountability as part of the One AI initiative at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Ronald and Kathleen also host a podcast called AI Today, and they are both active in a number of AI-related activities, including judging innovation awards at South by Southwest and writing for Forbes and for Tech Target Search AI, a specialized resource from a leading technology media company that focuses on AI technologies and applications. Most notably, Ronald and Kathleen founded the company Cognilytica. They are managing partners and lead instructors for a comprehensive and robust methodology they developed for managing projects that involve AI development and deployment. This methodology is in use by Fortune 1000 firms and government agencies around the world, and we'll be hearing more about it during tonight's show. Here to facilitate that discussion is our host, Kendall Lott. Kendall is the immediate past president of PMI Southern Maryland, CEO and president of Empowered Strategies, and chairman of the board and co-founder of the nonprofit Project Management for Change. Also, he hosts the podcast PM Point of View. Kendall?
Hey, Beth. Thanks for having me on here again, and nice to see you again. We keep running into each other, twice a month, it seems like, from all the different volunteer work. But I haven't gotten to hear you play drums yet. So when do we get to hear that track?
Yeah, that's not, we'll schedule that for a future episode.
Excellent. I'll look to clone it and see what we can do with it on one of these shows here pretty soon. So thanks for that introduction. And I'm sorry Harry couldn't be with us today, but I'm glad we got a chance to get back on the AI track here on this new topic. I was just thinking from my other board meeting how beauteous project management is, oh brave new world with such automation in it, because I can't keep up. I was just at a conference about this stuff at the end of January, and it's already every Friday something else gets released in terms of a tool set and things that people can do to solve business problems. So I'm glad that you guys managed to put this together at Southern Maryland. And it reminds me, because I was certainly impressed with what these two guests have brought to us, those of you who are listening. You don't often get to hear something like AI, project manager, Southern Maryland chapter, and the OECD all in one paragraph. So you're welcome from Southern Maryland that you get to hear that today from our guests and from the people that brought you this. So do tune in, do listen, and let's rock and roll. So there you were, team, pondering using AI. And you've been asking, along with many of the different podcasts and different webinars we've even done here, whether it enhances you or replaces you. Or is it just someone else's problem, or maybe somebody else's opportunity that you're not paying attention to yet? So let's say you have the opportunity to actually execute a project not enabled by your technology using AI, but rather an AI project. You've been asked to do the implementation, or maybe you get to sit in the room when the suits are coming up with, oh, what are we going to do? We got to keep up with all the competitors and the other teams around here. So we have this problem. So what you going to do? Who are you going to call? So tonight we got you covered. Rocking the speaker and workshop circuit in the DC Beltway area, we've got Kathy and Ron, as you just heard about from Cognilytica, who've been kicking around on this for a long time. And their focus, as I have followed their blog, and they do have a blog, and yes, I do follow it, is they're going to help us think about how not to overpromise and underdeliver. We're going to underpromise and overdeliver. Is that what's happening here, Ron? Is that what's happening, Kathy?
Oh, yeah. That's the whole plan.
Why don't we just deliver what we promised? That'd be a good start. So anyway, there's it may be madness, but there's method in it. So Kathy and Ron, welcome. Certainly thank you for coming on again and working our circuit for all the project managers in our area and beyond as we go virtual here. So project management. I was noticing something in one of your blogs. There's a little bit of a typicalness about this whole topic in the most generic sense, in that we get a new thing coming and it starts out as, oh my God, this is so new. This is new. We're going to have to manage differently. Finally, project managers will have to manage differently. And then about 3 minutes, 3 years, 3 seconds later, there's the, well, it's not really new. All of our standard processes, we don't need to throw out all of our best practices. They're going to still apply. So what's old is new. I'm beginning to think, as I age into this, that it's a matter of degree. So having said that, what I'd like to hear from the two of you is, what's the thesis that you want to put on the table? What is your actual claim about why we should be paying attention and what we need to be learning about here so we can work with that? What's the thesis you're going to prove for us?
Yep.
Yeah, so that is wonderful. And we always say AI is the oldest, newest technology because it has been around. It was originally coined as a term in 1956, but you're right, here we are all these years later, and people are still talking about it. And what we're finding is that there is a best practice methodology for running AI projects. So if you're being tasked to lead and manage an AI project, we say there is a best way, there is a methodology to follow. Don't reinvent the wheel here. And that methodology for us is CPMAI, the Cognitive Project Management for AI methodology.
Yeah, and I think like the big reason why, as you were mentioning, Isn't all project management the same? Well, to some extent, yeah, we're managing people and resources and schedules and time, and there's only so many ways to manage all those resources. But there is something different in the way that you run an AI project from, say, other technology projects. It has been in the past that, you generally run technology projects in general to functionality, and you build, test, deploy, iterate, manage, and that sort of stuff. But generally, when you build a non-intelligent system, you can build it and you can deploy it, and it pretty much functions the same way a month or two later after you've deployed it that it did on day one. And if it doesn't, then you can test it and you can find the bugs and you can fix the bugs. Unfortunately, with AI systems, it doesn't work that way because AI systems are so data dependent that their functionality today might not actually be the same functionality tomorrow, even if everything has stayed the same. The code has stayed the same, the data has stayed the same, the people have stayed the same, your deployment has stayed the same. That's the nature of intelligence, because the problems we're trying to solve with AI are fundamentally different than the problems we're trying to solve with non-AI. With non-AI, we can program things, we can do things with rules, and we can do things with functionality and code. But with AI, we're trying to derive the learning from data with machine learning and other approaches, and that's probabilistic, not deterministic. And so that means that we have failure modes with AI projects that we don't have with other projects. We can't set it and forget it. And there's lots of other things we can't do, which means that it kind of busts a lot of the project management things up when you can't have a done state, but you can't even necessarily have a functionality complete state. And I think that's the nuance, if you will, that AI adds to sort of the typical project management.
But it certainly sounds scary. I mean, I'm going to quote you on that, that it's probabilistic and it busts some project management things. So I guess there you go. There's our thesis right there. Are we going to bust some project management things or not? You got started. You started talking. I haven't been afraid of AI until you started talking just now. As you started talking, I was like, oh, the cat's out of the bag. Like literally it gets away from us and then we got to chase it down. And I don't mean as victimized as users of it at first, but as the project managers, like this thing's running away from us before I even get there. Oh, wait, now they're already showing us a methodology of what we got. Okay, we're going to get to that in a minute. Okay, so I'm looking to see where you guys are going to go with all this, and I'm pretty stunned. But cat's out of the bag was what I was thinking there. But the other thing is you mentioned the bugs. You debug it. It has bugs. Now I'm really worried. We might be releasing something that has bugs in it, and that's going to proliferate potentially or get weird. Data driven, I also heard dependent on data actually is what you said there, right? So the way to watch it is to starve it for data, I guess. When you guys have talked to us before, I think it depends a little bit on what business problems people are trying to solve. Now, Beth opened with the large language model, which has made it convenient for all of us to get to. But I remember talking to you guys before, and that wasn't the focus initially. And I certainly know that where a lot of the lawsuits we're seeing, like self-driven cars, that's not a large language problem. So
That's right.
You've cued me into that there are patterns here. So tell me about the business problems that you've seen project managers needing to address and why it's different. Oh, actually,
Yes,
let me confirm one more thing. There's a reason I bring that up. Research problems projects are also probabilistic. So in that sense, it's not entirely different. When we're doing, because I've interviewed people who are scientists doing research, and they don't know the answer that's going to happen either. But yet this still seems different. So it's something beyond the probabilistic. I'm sorry, Kath, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to address the probabilistic versus deterministic. Yeah. So when you need something done the same way over and over, that's automation, or you program that. And so that you need the same output every single time. I like to use the example of a coffee maker where every morning I program my coffee maker to go off at 5:30 in the morning. Whether or not I wake up at 5:30 in the morning or not, and whether or not I have put coffee grinds in and water in, I press that button to go off and it will no matter what. So that's programmed. If I want it to be probabilistic and say, you know what, I want this to adapt to when I wake up. And so some days I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Maybe some days I wake up at 8:30 in the morning and I want my coffee fresh and hot right when I get up. That's going to be probabilistic. It's not the same every single time. I can't program that before I go to bed. So that's how we think about probabilistic versus deterministic. As far as AI goes, you talked about generative AI, and I always like to say that we have been covering AI since before generative AI made it hot. And that, for the past year or two, a lot of people have been talking about generative AI. They've been using it, and it's been wonderful to have these discussions. But AI really is an umbrella term. And when we talk about AI, we like to bring it down one level deeper into the 7 patterns of AI. And so we had talked about OECD actually back in February of 2020. I went to Paris right before the world shut down to present on the 7 patterns of AI to OECD. And they have adopted that as their standard definition of AI, because despite the fact that it has been around since the 1950s, we don't have a commonly accepted definition of what artificial intelligence is. And I think that, a lot goes into play here. What is intelligence? So that's why we don't have a commonly accepted definition. The EU AI Act in Europe, the European Union AI Act, just passed, and they have accepted and adopted the 7 patterns of AI as their standard definition of AI as well. So when we think about it, we want to break it down one level deeper. You talked about generative AI. That's the conversational pattern where you're using the machine to interact with humans in human language. Maybe we can also have the recognition pattern there if we're helping it to, create images for us. But there's a lot more to AI than just generative AI.
Yeah, and actually, this might be a good point to pull up the 7 patterns of AI picture. I think we have a handy dandy little graphic for you here, and I think this is part of the telling part because as you mentioned, we've had probabilistic systems before, but I think the difference is that we're trying to make the machines do things that otherwise we would have people do, right? And if you think about it, it's very hard to program a person. We try, but people are probabilistic. People don't necessarily do the same things the same way every time. They have some reliability issues. They have some accuracy issues. We're starting to see these things in AI systems because that is the kind of thing we're trying to do with AI. So if you're not aware, intelligence, it's hard to define what intelligence is and what intelligence is not, just in biological creatures. Does intelligence stop at bacteria? Nobody really knows. But I think what we do when we think of intelligence, we think of what's called the 3 Ps, which are perception, prediction, and planning. Those are the 3 things that we have that intelligence systems can do that non-intelligent systems can't do. They can't perceive the world around them. They can't predict what's going to happen next, and they can't plan for the future. But this is what we want our artificial intelligence systems to do. So as Kathleen mentioned, there's 7 general patterns of AI that these are the things that we want to build intelligence systems to do. One of those things is recognition. That's the perception pattern. Understand images, text, video, audio, just do recognition. This is sort of the image recognition, facial recognition, right? The conversational.
Hold on a second. Everything you've just said, I had this in sudden picture as soon as you were setting us up for the 7.
Yeah.
You're talking about, you said we don't often get to do that. Anyone who's raised a kid is following everything you've just said in the last minute and a half. You can't tell what's going to happen. You try and program them for something, but you don't know what's going to come out. And then you got to start teaching them things like who's mommy and daddy, and then what is the next word in the sentence. And if you touch that, it will hurt. Don't do that. And I'm suddenly realizing this isn't computers. This is trying to build. The only experience I have similar to that is child rearing.
Yeah,
right.
You can think of that.
It's an adaptive development system that you can't really control.
Right.
At least in my experience.
That's a great. That's in many ways, AI systems act like toddlers. And they have the same sort of judgment capability as toddlers. And if you wouldn't expect your toddler to know the difference between real and fake, most likely the AI systems can't do that either. Right.
Yeah, that's what happens when you're watching TV with kids sometimes. Okay, I have a whole new mind frame in the last 30 seconds. Everybody on this show, if you're a young PM particularly, you might want to look at these 7 patterns and start thinking parenting advice from the world of formerly known as automation. Okay, have at it. First, we teach them about recognition. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Now, please, pray continue.
Yeah, actually, Kathleen, you could, she'd like to pick it up here. We'll talk about the conversational pattern. We'll work our way to the hyper-personalization pattern.
Sure. Yeah. And it's a wheel because we have one pattern where, you start or end. But as we mentioned, the recognition pattern, that really is making sense of that unstructured data that's out there, which if anybody has worked at an organization, you know that you have a lot of it. Then the conversation and human interaction pattern, this is where we want machines to be able to interact with humans in the way that humans talk in our natural language. So when we think about this pattern, obviously chatbots come to mind as a use case. We have predictive analytics and decision support patterns. So this is where you take past or current data to help you make predictions, and it helps humans make predictions. So we really have the human involved in that pattern. We have our goal-driven pattern, which is really using reinforcement learning, and it's to find the most optimal path through a maze. We think about this a lot with game playing and different scenarios. So robo-advising, for example, or to find the most optimal route, like I said. Then we have the autonomous systems pattern. So the goal of this pattern is to remove the human from the loop. Don't confuse automation and autonomous pattern, because automation, while it is incredibly useful, is not intelligent, and so it is not one of the 7 patterns of AI. But with the autonomous systems, the goal of this is to remove the human from the loop. And so that can either be with physical hardware systems, we think about autonomous vehicles, for example, or it can be with software systems where we have autonomous software processes. Then we have our patterns and anomalies pattern. So machines are really good at being able to process lots of data very quickly and find patterns in that data, and then outliers as well. So we think about fraud detection as an example here. And the last pattern is hyper-personalization. So the goal is to treat each individual as an individual, and no longer do we need to bucket people into groups and categories. Obviously, you think about marketing with this one, but you can also have hyper-personalized healthcare or hyper-personalized finance, hyper-personalized medicine, hyper-personalized education. How can I, treat each person individually and really tailor specifically to their needs? And so that is a very high-level overview of the 7 patterns of AI.
Have you seen the emphasis shifting yourselves even before the chat explosion? Were you seeing this shift, or was it generally being developed everywhere, or how do you get your hands around this global environment of 7 patterns?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things we noticed. One of the things that generative AI really did change and shift was that it really did put AI capabilities, any sort of AI capabilities, in the hands of pretty much anyone. As I said, that AI has crossed the chasm, as a term that I like to use, when your mom sends you a text message asking you about ChatGPT. I'm like, okay, well, I guess everybody's doing AI now. But what we were finding was that—
And it's not your actual mom. It's actually somebody coding a bot for you.
Yeah, fake
That's
mom.
when
You have to be careful about that these days. It is true. You don't believe everything you read, see, hear, this kind of stuff. But the biggest thing for us was that each of these different patterns, they actually are very different applications. Building an autonomous system is not the same as building a chatbot or building a recognition system or building a predictive analytics system. And that's what we're realizing right now, because you can get on ChatGPT and you can do the conversational pattern in a snap. But I can't say, okay, now go ahead, build an autonomous system. It's like, whoa, wait a second. Now it's a very different kind of project. That's the first tip off that we had, was that, yes, these are all AI, but they're not really all the same application of AI. And the differences in applications really are fairly significant in terms of resources, availability, skill level, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Data, the algorithms you're going to select, ROI on the project, maybe the time frame of the project.
Mm-hmm. So what varies in these, actually, interestingly enough, I think this is highlighting something that we always have known, I guess I don't think enough about, is what happens as a project manager around the project is absolutely about the business problem and its proposed solution, not about the nature of the team, the nature of the methodology, or even the nature of the technology you're launching. It's like, this is really highlighting that whole pattern of thinking how you normally would do it might collapse. What is it that's being solved will change, I would imagine, the type of project. So are you able to see? So now I'm really intrigued. What is more specific to this type of probabilistic implementation, or an implementation of a probabilistic solution that's not just generic project management, somehow different, but also all those 7 are going to, I would imagine, have different project management requirements as they're developed and implemented as you do a project like that. So as a project manager, I want to take it into our space. Do I think about scope on all 7? It must be different. What are you observing? Which one's the most anomalous or difficult to handle from a traditional project management lens?
Well, the hardest one to handle is the autonomous pattern in general, because the goal is to remove the human from the loop. So whenever you're doing that, you have to be darn near perfect. We think about autonomous vehicles, for example, and we would not feel comfortable if 80% of the time it got us to our destination. No, I want it to get me to my destination 100% of the time, and I want it to get me there safe. So that is the hardest pattern. And we always say, if possible, don't start with that pattern. There's other patterns that are much easier to implement, such as predictive analytics pattern, because the goal of that pattern is to help humans make better decisions. We're not removing humans from the loop. We also talk a lot about the conversational pattern. We have many examples out there right now that is successfully being used and adopted. That is not that difficult anymore. Also, the recognition pattern, being able to, like I said, make sense of that unstructured data. So maybe, identify objects in different images, object recognition, facial recognition. We're doing that as well. So some patterns are easier than others. And that's why we always say, start with one of the easier patterns if you can, which, as I said, is predictive analytics, maybe conversational, as opposed to the autonomous pattern. And we always say, think big, start small, and iterate often. So try and keep that scope as small as possible so that you aren't, getting scope creep and taking on a lot more than you really should, so that your project doesn't fail.
Right. And I think that's sort of the big key point, is that in that first phase of CPMAI, which is the business understanding phase, and CPMAI builds upon a methodology that's been around for decades called CRISP-DM, for those that may be familiar with in the data space. And one of the things that it teaches you is, like, as small as you think your project is, you could probably make it smaller, because we have, in the world of AI, we have one thing that's sort of, different, perhaps from a non-AI project, and that is its data dependency. But we have a tension going on here. We actually have multiple tension going on here. On one hand, we know we need, the more data we have, the better the system performs, because it can learn from more data. If you don't have enough data, you're learning maybe on edge cases, or you're learning not necessarily enough data points, and it may be generalizing in a way that will end up being really bad. Lots of hallucinations, doing the wrong thing, whatever the problem is. On the other hand, if I have too much data, I also know the adage, garbage in is garbage out. So if I have a lot of bad data, then I'm also causing problems. So the more data you have, it turns out the better the quality of the learning, but also the more data you need to clean and you need to prepare. And people don't spend enough time and energy cleaning bad data. So they might think, oh, let me get petabyte of image data. It's like, well, has anybody actually gone in and checked the quality of that image data? And a lot of times they haven't. And what they end up doing is they end up making it even worse than if they had a small amount of data. So part of it is sort of breaking down the project into these smaller projects that can be done with smaller patterns, that can be done with smaller amounts of data in as rapid a time as possible to iterate on it. And some of that was done with the CRISP-DM methodology, but they didn't really talk about how to actually build that for machine learning models. And that's the part that CPMAI added to that.
I've seen projects, large-scale projects before that I've worked with in the government or been on those projects before, that the whole area around data has been a big deal, where people realize they have to do the whole data normalization, data standardization, data cleansing. And it drives people nuts because it's frankly boring. And from the executive's perspective, it's like, seriously, you're gonna charge us all this money to make sure, X, Y, and Z is right and meaningful and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, it means going back to the well sometimes about where is the source data coming from that we now need to get and do differently. In your different patterns, so having said that, in the 7 different patterns of business solutions that you're after, right? Those are patterns of solutions, right? The implementation
application side. Patterns, sure.
The applications, yeah. Does the data understanding problem tend to vary? Because you were just mentioning, like, your images. I would assume that's only in some of the patterns that you might use that. Are we seeing a lot of variation about how difficult the data understanding is? Or is that even a relevant question in this case? I'm trying to think of someone being assigned to be on a project.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we always say, start with business understanding. What problem are you trying to solve? Make sure that AI is a good solution for it. If it is, we know we're going to need data, which you most likely are going to need it for any project, but we know that it's so important with AI projects. The second phase is data understanding. So we say, okay, now that we know that we're solving a problem and that AI is the right solution for this, what data do we need? And we say, that's why we want to start small, because we don't want too much data. We know that that's going to take a lot of time, could cost a lot of money, especially if we have to clean that data. And access is a major issue. Despite organizations wishing they didn't have data silos, they do. And so do you have access to that data? If you don't have access to that data, how long is it going to take to get? If it's going to take 5 months, that's absolutely way too long. We need to scale back the scope of our project. And once we understand that, then we say, okay, now we're ready to move forward. Do we have access to that data? Maybe I've scaled back the scope of my project even further. We're going to start with data that we have access to. Or maybe we're getting third-party data. Ron talked about there's a lot of data out there that's already labeled. Say we want to have that for an image recognition problem that we're trying to solve. Can we just buy some of that data rather than having to label it ourselves or clean that data ourselves? So that's what we need to be checking in data understanding. From there, then we can go to our data cleaning and say, okay, data preparation stage, and say, okay, now that we've actually are solving a real problem, we understand our data needs. What do we do to get the data in the state that we need?
Yeah. And to your point, there are some projects that don't require as much data collection or data preparation. Like, for example, there's no reason now to build your own language model. Because not too long ago, maybe I'm talking 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, if you wanted to build your own, say, sentiment analysis tool or any natural language processing tool, let's say to take a look at a document and figure out and summarize the document, or generate some new content from a small amount of content. We're obviously very familiar with that right now. That's we're doing our prompts. You would have to build your own model. There weren't many off-the-shelf models for doing it. Lo and behold, in November of 2022, I think it was, ChatGPT comes out, and on its tail, not only ChatGPT, but all these other models, Bard and Gemini now, and the Claude, Anthropic models, and like Llama and all these, now they've been trained on the whole corpus of the whole internet. There's no reason to basically build almost any natural language processing model yourself, which means that you don't have to go around and collect the data for maybe examples of invoices if you wanted to do invoice classification, or generate sentiments so that you can train it. So that means that you can shrink those projects down very fast. And this is, again, if you know you're doing that pattern, this is why it helps to do the pattern. If you know you're doing a conversational pattern, you already know that you could shortcut. If it's like within the scope of what an LLM can do, you could shortcut that to a matter of days, if not a matter of hours, to make your at least one iteration of that project happen.
Let's bring up that slide on your methodology, because I think as PMs, I'm just going to take a wild guess here. We tend to process orientation and milestones and spots on a chart on a wheel. You've talked us through a little bit about the data preparation, and this is for all your patterns. The application is data driven around all your patterns, right? To help design what's needed for the business solutioning, the application for the business understanding. When you talk about model development, then that seems to me to be a very super generic button there, because your 7 patterns must have very radically different concepts of models. So, as a PM, and I'm like, okay, I got to tell the bosses what's up here. I'm like, okay, step 4 is model development. What's going on in model development, and what is some stuff that we should be looking out for there as we think about that?
Go ahead, Kathleen. Yeah.
Okay. So with model development, what we're doing here is, we say 80% of your AI project is about, the data phase, and it's that, data engineering. So when we get to model development now, we've done all that work with our data and also making sure that we're solving a real problem. And so now we're actually getting to what, people call that quote unquote fun stuff, so that they are actually saying, saying, okay, now what do we need to do to actually build this model? And then we get to say, okay, now, this is the algorithms that we're going to use. This is how we're going to do this. And then we say, okay, now we're going to evaluate it and make sure that it's performing as expected, because we said it's probabilistic. You're never going to get 100% accuracy, but you need to set a threshold of what is and is not acceptable. So if I have sentiment analysis, for example, if that's what I'm trying to build, maybe I only need 85% accuracy, and that, so if it isn't 100%, that's not a big deal. Or if it's not 97% accurate. But if I have facial recognition, I'm going to need it to be a lot more accurate. So maybe I need to set it to 97% there. This is where you're evaluating it and making sure that it's working as expected, so that when you actually operationalize the model and put it out in the real world, it's performing as you expect. And like Ron said, it is never a set it and forget it. Ever when it comes to AI, your models are going to not perform the same over time. Model drift and data drift are both real. And so it will just, not perform the same over time. That's why you need to constantly be retraining it, because also we know that the real world is messy and that data changes and things can change. And so that's why this is iterative, so that we can go back and say, okay, now let's move forward, and do this again. And so if we're building a chatbot, for example, we always say, think about the question that is the most frequently asked question, and let's start by answering that. And you can do that in one phase of CPMAI. Then let's move to the second most commonly asked question and answer that. And then the third most commonly asked question. So that way we're controlling scope. We're not saying, let's try and answer, 80,000 different questions in 5 different languages all at once. Maybe that's your thinking big, but then you start small and we say, okay, well, let's just start with one language and the most commonly asked question in that. And that's how we walk through the methodology.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I think to your point about model development and thinking about what that means, it means like taking your instance of the thing that's learned something for your particular task, basically creating that instance so that way you can use it. Because you can't just say, oh, I'm building a chatbot for my website, let's say, and you just point people to ChatGPT, because then they're going to ask questions about anything. So what you need to do is you need to, at that point, now you're basically narrowed your world down. It's like, well, I'm making an instance of this thing for this particular application in this particular iteration. And I think that's where hopefully that part of the process is accelerated, because people don't need to hire necessarily data scientists and machine learning engineers. Now a lot of that's been simplified, but somebody still has to put that together, and that can only be put together once we know what problem we're solving, what pattern we're solving, what data that we need, and then the data needs to be clean so that we can actually have something reliable, basically.
I get, given that the data is such an engine of this, that you would have data drift, because it's going to accrue data and accrete data over time. How do you get model drift in this? Is this specific to certain types of implementations, or just generally that's how this works? My brain's not comprehending that one very well. I can't get my head around the thing I built. Is it because it's building itself? It's modifying itself? Like what's happening with model drift?
Yeah. So this is kind of interesting, because there's an interesting quote from Andrew Ng, who some of you may know, who's a very well-known AI researcher, entrepreneur, started deeplearning.ai and Coursera and all this sort of stuff. And he talks about the fact that they had built this great model that worked well with X-ray images, radiology images at the Stanford Medical School, and it was working great. But then they took that same model and they went down the street and they tried it on a different X-ray machine and a different imaging protocol, and it was failing. It's like, what was the difference? It's like, obviously what happens is that the data maybe stays the same, but there's some difference in the real world, right? And the real world says, like, okay, you said you tested your chatbot and it worked really well, but all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of people asking all sorts of things that were edge cases. Maybe you did something and now you have a bunch of non-native English speakers or whatever that have been added to it, and now you're getting much worse results. So model drift has to do with the fact that even if the data stays the same, there's something about the way that the model's being used or being applied that doesn't match the way that it has been trained. in a perfect world, everything matches. The data you use and the real world matches. A good example of that is one of the very first neural net based machine learning models was something called LeNet, which was developed by Jan LeCun, which is where it comes from, where he did basically handwriting recognition for checks. In 1997, they built that first model, and they basically just got this huge corpus of handwriting samples, and they basically trained the system to recognize what the A letter was and the B, et cetera, and all the numbers. And it actually hasn't drifted that much. Basically, people have not fundamentally changed the nature of their handwriting so that it would fail. But if, for whatever reason, people start changing their handwriting for some reason, then all of a sudden that model will stop working very well. Maybe there's situations like that. Maybe it's even going back in time, against calligraphy. Maybe it wouldn't work that well actually against calligraphy checks or something.
Or let's not introduce new characters.
Exactly. I could barely. Sometimes I'm like, is that really the letter T? I don't know. I don't even understand how that looks like a letter G. It's like sometimes calligraphy is a mystery.
So you guys are training people to think about how to do these project implementations, and that's where Cognilytica is coming from. That's the perch it's sitting on. Is that where I'm at? Is it this idea about like learning to think about being a PM differently, or is it only for PMs? How are you seeing this? Who's your target audience for this discussion?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's not just for project managers. It's for anybody who's looking to run and manage an AI project, which isn't always a project manager. It can fall to other roles as well, or anybody that's on the team that wants to learn how to do this, because it is a step-by-step approach, and everybody on the team is going to touch one or more of the phases. So we do get a lot of project managers who take the course, but then we also get non-traditional project managers, or maybe they are, new to this role and they're being tasked with running and managing an AI project, and they have not much guidance from the organization or other people that they can go to ask questions. So they look to CPMAI, or maybe they're interested, their organization wants to start adopting AI and they don't know where to begin. So we get people who take it for a variety of different reasons and want to learn the methodology and go through the training and certification for sometimes just for the education aspect, sometimes for, the certification, so that they can say they get that stamp of approval and say, somebody else has recognized that I know how to run and manage AI projects. And then a lot of people do it for a combination of a bunch of those reasons.
The framework, the methodology, they're really into that as well.
Something that PMI has done from where they sit, they obviously offered, I'm using an analogy here, right? Adjacency model, if you will. They do training. They have a standard. They do training. And then they also do these looks out into what is the state of play, right? They look at how project management is being used and look at some of the portfolio. Have you guys been able to see anything about what any stats on the likelihood of AI projects or projects that are implementing AI working or not working or being delivered on time or solving what they need to solve? How's the record stacking up? Is it harder? Are we seeing failures? What are we seeing here? Or do we know? Or do you know?
Oh no, we know. There's been some stats, right, Kathleen?
Yeah, we're seeing failures, and actually the numbers are a little all over the board, and so we're conducting some research as well, which we hope to have published later this year to see what we're showing. But anywhere from 75 to 80% of AI projects are failing for one reason or another. And we say, is this really high compared to other projects? Because we understand that, projects fail for a number of different reasons, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the case. And so we find that, there's 10 common reasons why AI projects fail. Some of that is around data quality and data quantity issues. Some of that is around, they're not using the right solution for the problem. So sometimes they are vendor X shop, and that really shouldn't be who they're going with, and they're using it. So we say they're trying to put a, round peg in a square hole, and it's just not fitting. We also see it around the ROI is not justified. People also are not doing pilot projects. And so when it comes to artificial intelligence, we say if you're going to do a proof of concept, as Ron brought up with that Andrew Ng example with the radiology images, if you are testing this out with state-of-the-art imagery and technology, and then you move to another hospital down the road that may have older equipment, it was failing. But humans, on the other hand, were not failing. Radiologists could go down the street and do just fine. So you need to make sure that you are paying attention to that as well. And then the biggest problem that we see, and this is why it is so important that we start with data understanding and say, make sure we're actually solving a problem, that our scope is in check, is over-promising and under-delivering on what AI can do. So people get so excited, they just want to jump forward into their project. And if we said 80% of your project is going to be data engineering, that means you have to be doing all of the things around data, right, to make sure that you can move forward. But a lot of people want to jump right into model development. And we say, hold on a second. Do you have that data? Do you have access to that data? Is that data in a good usable state? Can we move forward? Do you have everybody on your team? Have you, really considered the scope? And so unfortunately, we see a lot of projects failing because people are moving forward without a methodology in place, without a plan in place, without that step-by-step approach. And they really overpromise and then underdeliver on what they can do. The project fails. They've spent a lot of money and time and resources, and the organization says, okay, this was a failure and we're never doing this again. So that is what we say, please avoid, because it doesn't have to be that way.
You've got me thinking when you said that, I get scared the more you guys keep talking, because now I'm thinking when project managers are in one way that we can talk about projects failing is not that it didn't produce something. It's when it produced it 5 years too late and 3 times over budget, or in some cases 3 years too late and 5 times over budget if you followed any of the large institutions that produce projects sometimes. So scope, schedule, and budget can cause you to fail, and we sometimes don't think about the value or ultimately the value proposition. It might have still hit it. I'm thinking in some of these products that might come out of a project like this, whether it hit scope, scale, I guess it falls in scope and ROI, this might be a product that works, but works badly or dangerously or not where you wanted it to work. Like, it's not about functionality. It's really about that ROI. Did it hit what I needed to be able to do as it changes over time? Yes. And so that's a whole different level of failure, right?
Yeah, we actually have many examples of this.
Right.
Especially around chatbots.
Yeah. That's the big issue is the guardrails, because there's some really bad failure modes with AI. It's more like a website. You build a bad website. Your failure mode is maybe people don't use it. You get poor engagement. Maybe you get poor conversion. Whatever the measures are. But a bad AI, bad chatbot, or a bad AI system can land you in jail, or it can get you fined. We have so many cases. Air Canada, they had a chatbot. I don't know if you saw the case. They went to court. They lost. Right. Basically, their chatbot said that, they had a bereavement policy which disagreed with their own website. And the Air Canada's argument was like, well, you can't believe what the chatbot always says, which is like ridiculous argument, because then how can a person decide that the website is authoritative and a chatbot's not? There's another case, actually, turns out it was a Chrysler dealership. Somebody had talked to them and said, I'd like to buy a Chrysler for $1 or whatever it was. And then the chatbot said, okay. And then they took that to the salesperson. The salesperson was like, you can't, and if it gets like this, then what's the point? Like, kind of like, why did you spend all that time? Somebody spent the time and effort to build the chatbot. Or like very recently this week, New York, a city, they have a chatbot where it was telling landlords that they could, like, if I forget the rules. Yeah, they can discriminate.
Yeah, they can discriminate, basically. Yeah, and then break the law. They said, do you need to, if someone has a Section 8 voucher, do I need to accept it? And the chatbot was coming back, no, you do not need to accept that. You do not need to. And so, they had a table that said, in the article, actually, this is wrong and here's why. And it was multiple instances that this chatbot was incorrect.
So you say, like, well, are these then toy projects? Are they not real? Well, I mean, they spent a lot of money. I mean, Air Canada, the car dealership in New York, they spent a lot of money and a lot of time. I don't think they would ever thought like this is a throwaway,
Well, they're deploying it. I mean, they're telling people to use it. And that is where this can get dangerous, right? New York City was saying, use this as a resource because, Air Canada too, they say, okay, maybe you want to converse with the chatbot at 3:00 in the morning and we don't have people in our call center. Or maybe you need an answer right away because you need to book your air flight in the next 15 minutes and there's a 1 hour, wait time so that you can't afford to do that because you have to book this. So there's a lot of reasons why people want to use chatbots and they are beneficial, but then you have to be careful.
Yeah, classic overpromise, because someone's saying, oh, if I put a chatbot in, I can get rid of my call center team, or I can reduce call center time by 50%, or, hey, if I put in a chatbot, I don't need to update my website, or blah, blah, blah. That's the promise. But we tell people that's an overpromise. You're betting a lot on that AI system being right. And people just fall into this trap where they see a little glimmer of something of AI, then they go all in. They go whole, and then they're like, wait a second here. This is a toddler. This is not an adult. This is a toddler. I'm sure your 3-year-old might get it right 80% of the time, but would you put them in the call center? And the answer is probably not. So the question is,
you like that organic development model better and better the more you guys talk. Hey, listen, I was following something in your blog, and again, I want to make sure that you guys got your information out there because I know you got a workshop probably coming up as well. People need to follow some of this, and you mentioned a couple things I wanted to follow up with. So we're down in one of the models here, or one of the patterns here. I recognize that, but you have quite a bit about prompt engineering, which in my house we call AI whisperer. Because it's almost more art than science. I cannot get it right. I read your blog and I got some cool ideas out of it, which is I should ask it to tell me what the questions are. That would help.
Yeah.
I'd never thought of reverse engineering the thing. So I got that out of your recent one of your serials. But tell us a little bit about AI whispers, or rather, I'm sorry, prompt engineering. Do I got to hire a new kind of person here, and a new kind of SME just to be able to handle this? What's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's something that you can learn, but it's something that more and more people are going to need to know how to do if you want to be able to use these large language models effectively. So we say if you ask it a generic question, you're going to get a generic response. And sometimes that's okay. When you say, what is the capital of France? And it comes back, it's Paris. Okay, great, right? Like that's not changing. I'm using it as kind of a Q&A feature so that I'm not, going on and going to a search engine instead. And that's just fine. But if I want to use it to help me create a blog post, for example, well, there's a lot more that I'm going to need to be able to break down. So maybe I say, all right, well, let's start with an outline. And then from that outline, you can write section by section so that we aren't just saying, write me a blog post on AI for project management, how to successfully run an AI project in 2,000 words. You're going to get a pretty generic article if you do it that way. But if you say, I need to, act as, there's a lot of best practices. And so in our blog series, we have a weekly newsletter that comes out, and I encourage everybody here to subscribe. You can go to Cognilytica.com, or you can find us on LinkedIn, and we publish to the newsletter there. We're at part 2. We just published today of a 6-part series on best practices. And so there's something that we discussed today called prompt chaining. And so what do you do? And so we say, we'll break it down, and we provide step-by-step examples. There's lots of different ways to do it. There's different prompts that you can follow as well. There's, best practices with prompts. And so you can say, act as somebody and do this role or task. And so you can say, act as a project manager and put together an outline for a 2,000-word article on best practices for running and managing AI projects. And the more specific you get, the better, less general and generic response you're going to get from the large language model.
I think I want to get to your point here about, do we need a new role? The answer is, I think we all need new skills. The best analogy that I can think of is, imagine you took your computer and the internet and you were somehow able to go back in time to 1980 or 1970, right? And you go, this little device is the most powerful things. I can communicate. I can look up information. I can do all this sorts of stuff. The person in the 19th would have no idea, no clue how to extract any value out of it. They wouldn't know how to turn it on. They wouldn't know what to do once it's turned on. They wouldn't. They don't understand the internet. They wouldn't. And fundamentally, like, we're not really that different of a person. Probably the person from the 1970s is probably right here speaking to us right now. I mean, so, we have people who are born before the 1970s. So what has changed between 1970 and 2024? The answer is that we have grown up and we've all learned the skills of computing and the internet. We all know the importance of email and spreadsheets and documents and Google searching and all this sort of stuff, and how to watch videos, how to watch this video, right? And I think that's where we are with AI tools. That this is sort of like the where we are in the world, and everybody has to learn. Right now, we're just learning how to turn on the computer, how to get that little blinky thing. Back in the days of cursor, when we had cursors and we had to type load or run or whatever we had to do. We're in that phase right now, but soon we're going to be in the phase of people just whipping out their phones and taking 3D pictures and AI things, and that's where we're going to be. And that's honestly where a lot of the technology companies hope we're going to be, because they're putting a lot of money into it right now.
I'm suddenly feeling tired enough to retire because, you said we're all going to have to learn. I'm like, yeah, and they told me I was going to have to learn Python at one point too. I somehow managed to get here without having to learn how to code any of that stuff. But
good.
That's just me being cynical.
That way. You don't need to know Python anymore. That's good.
Exactly. As soon as you get your hands on any changes, which takes me to one of my last questions here. So as you guys have been building your curriculum to teach and reflecting what you're seeing in the industry, and again, congratulations on getting how you've perceived the world to be a structured model that others are seeing. There's like a standard or a way of looking at this that's important for us to be able to break down. I imagine they're going to change over time, those patterns about how they get addressed. I imagine ongoing differentiation happens, which is my question. Where do you see this going next as you think about even what you need to be learning about to teach next? Where do you see the next problem set coming from? That's like, okay, I've got my classes and my students and participants learning these things, becoming effective or not as we watch the industry. What's going to be the next problem that you're seeing from the patterns perspective and the teaching perspective?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing is that we're all basically going one level deeper. That's, I think, where everybody is at. And that's why we for a while, we didn't really look too much at prompt engineering, to your point, which is that, first of all, it's changing very fast. So it's very hard to put your finger on it now and have it be relevant a year from now, which is actually interesting. So that's why we had to get into, let's not look at the platforms, let's just look at the general approaches. And there are some best practices for that. But I think everybody's going to go one level deeper, which is, okay, how am I going to solve any of these kinds of problems right now, today, with the technology that I have, with the skills that I have? I think there is a change in the roles. Yes, 2, 3, 4 years ago, data science was the sexiest profession, hottest job title, but it's actually changing now because a lot of these things have democratized AI, which means it's both plus and minus, which means that it's in the hands of more people, which can be a good thing, but it's also in the hands of more people, which could be a bad thing. So there's like two sides to that. So I think we're looking one level deeper. I don't think the patterns fundamentally change, or maybe the phases or anything like that. But like, people are going to want more refinement. I know, Kathleen, you want to add to that story?
Yeah. And, we always like to see how people are actually adopting the technology and how people are actually running and managing their AI projects, how they adopt CPMAI to fit within their own organization and their own AI projects. And that's why we think that it is so important to, constantly keep a pulse on things. But we also say AI is an emerging technology. And so, if you've been following generative AI and how that's really been changing the game, people couldn't have predicted that just a few years ago. So we always like to, and we are constantly reflecting on the 7 patterns of AI as well, and say, is there an 8th pattern? Is there a 9th pattern? And so far, we have not found one, no matter all of the applications that we've seen. We also do focus a lot on AI failures, because we want to see why these projects are failing, so that we can teach others and say, don't make these same mistakes. So, we've identified about 10 common reasons, like I said, why AI projects fail. And I encourage people who are watching this to go to our podcast, aitoday.live. We have a failure series where we go over these in much greater detail, because it is important. Not a lot of people talk about the failures. They only want to talk about the successes and the wins, but there's a lot to be learned from failures, and sometimes more than with the wins, because you understand where they struggled and then either how they overcame it or why they didn't and how you can do something different. So that's why we do spend a lot of time. And we always like to, because continually, even now, we brought up the Air Canada example. We brought up the New York City example. As other companies and other agencies, other governments where, that is supposed to be the authoritative site, go, and you're looking for answers and you find that, oh, well, sorry, the chatbot's wrong. It's, you have to be careful. So again, AI Today is our podcast. We talk about all of this there. I encourage your listeners who are here tonight and watching this replay to go to aitoday.live to listen to that, and also follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to the newsletter, where we also dig into a lot of these in greater detail too.
Well, our chat box may be wrong, but our clock is not. Our timer is not. And we've gone red. We're redlining over here, our own time. But I did want to say, where can people? You just followed up how people can follow you, and I do have some other questions. I'm going to watch your blog to see when you answer the question, what is an AI winter? You made a passing reference, and I'm like, I'm a child of nuclear winter discussion, so I want to know what that is. But not tonight.
We have podcasts on that and articles, and so I encourage you. It's maybe podcast number 3.
Podcast number 3. Where are people going to be able to see you discussing next or engaging next, or your next class? Where is the next time people get to see Cognilytica show up for them and talk about these things?
We have quite a few options. Well, first of all, you can learn from us right now. CPMAI, the methodology, training, and certification is self-paced. You can go to Cognilytica, Cognilytica.com. You might even see it behind me here, there, and you can go
to
the
message. You are okay.
Yeah, look at that. Like I might be mirrored here. But anyway, I go to the site and you can take our training and courses. But we also do a lot of stuff. We, as mentioned, bi-weekly podcast, AI Today. Just go to aitoday.live or cognilytica.com/AI Today. You'll get there as well. We do a lot of speaking. We're going to be at a bunch of PMI events. We're going to be speaking live at the Hartford, Connecticut, Southern New England chapter. We're also going to be live in Austin, and we're going to be live in a few other places in person.
Actually, and then Washington, D.C. chapter as well.
Yeah.
April 9th.
That's right. So we'll be there in person. And then we have a bunch of virtual speaking as well. Follow us. We try to list as much as we can on our newsletter and in our events speaking page. So, yeah, just follow us.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm glad to hear that one of our sponsors has you up there. And I know that that's what Beth wants to tell us about. So with that, I'm going to say goodnight and thank you guys for coming and sharing again. Again, it's a pleasure to meet you guys. We've met before, and I appreciate you coming back to give us more. Beth, over to you.
All right. Thank you. I have a few really great takeaways from tonight's session. My favorite is that in many ways, AI systems act like toddlers. That is such a great guiding principle for approaching the management of an AI tool or the use of an AI tool. I think that was just, that's my favorite, but I've got quite a few gems actually in my notes. I do have a few announcements before we sign off tonight. The annual Project Management Symposium hosted by University of Maryland's Project Management Center for Excellence is just around the corner. It will take place at UMD on Thursday, April 18th and Friday, April 19th with both in-person and virtual attendance options. Register at pmsymposium.umd.edu. PMI Southern Maryland is offering a Certified Scrum Master training class April 22nd through 25th. You can sign up for that class on their website. PMI WDC has at least 3 events next week, 3 that I know of, but Kathleen mentioned that she and Ron will be at PMI WDC on the 9th, and I did not see that on their website. The ones that I did see are their next membership orientation session, which will be in person on April 9th at 5:30 p.m. Their next book club meeting will be on April 10th over Zoom. The book is When the Heavens Went on Sale, The Misfits and Geniuses Racing to Put Space Within Reach by Ashley Vance. I think that title sounds very intriguing. And there will be an in-person lunchtime learning presentation on PM lessons in deploying Google's distributed cloud hosted on April 11th at 11:30 a.m. Details for all 3 events are on the PMI WDC website. Our next episode of True Talks Live will be on May 7th, that's a Tuesday again, with guest John Johnson from the University of Maryland. The topic will be product management. I hope you'll join us. Finally, don't forget to submit your PDU claim for tonight. Thank you and good night.